Harlan County, Kentucky, sprawled across 467 square miles of some of the most unforgiving terrain in the eastern United States in 1979. The Cumberland Mountains rose like ancient walls, their peaks reaching over 4,000 feet, their valleys so narrow and deep that sunlight only touched the bottom for a few hours each day. Population stood around 33,000, down from 75,000 in the boom years of the 1950s when coal was king. The county seat, also called Harlan, held barely 2,000 souls who knew each other's business, each other's secrets, and each other's grudges going back decades. October in Harlan meant temperatures dropping to the low 40s at night, creeping up to maybe 60 by mid-afternoon, if you were lucky. The air smelled like wood smoke from coal stoves and fireplaces, mixed with the sweet rot of fallen leaves and the metallic tang of mountain streams running cold over limestone. At night, when fog rolled down from the ridges, you could hear owls calling across the hollers and the distant barking of dogs chained outside trailers and cabins scattered through the hills. Sound traveled strange in those mountains. Sometimes you'd hear a truck engine 2 miles away, clear as a bell. Other times, you wouldn't hear a man walking 10 feet behind you. But 1979 was a devastating year for coal country. The mining industry that had sustained Harlan County for nearly a century was in freefall. Mines that had employed thousands now sat abandoned, their entrances sealed with concrete, their machinery rusting in the rain. Unemployment hovered around 40%. Men who'd spent their entire adult lives underground, breathing coal dust, risking their lives for union wages, now had nothing. No jobs, no prospects, no way to feed their families except disability checks that barely covered rent and food stamps that bought humiliation at the checkout counter. In that economic wasteland, some families turned to the oldest Appalachian tradition, claiming coal seams that technically belonged to nobody. Not stealing, exactly, more like staking a claim on land that had been worked by their families for generations. Land that the big coal companies had abandoned when the seams got too thin to be profitable. But when multiple families claimed the same seam, when desperation met desperation, when men with nothing to lose faced off over the only thing left that might feed their families, violence became inevitable. Daniel Robert Morgan was 52 years old that October, though he looked closer to 65. 6'1", but stooped forward from 3 decades spent hunched in coal seams barely 4 feet high. His hands were huge, knuckles swollen with arthritis, fingers permanently stained black from coal dust that no amount of scrubbing could remove. A thick scar ran from his left ear down to his collarbone, souvenir from a roof collapse in 1971 that killed 2 men standing right beside him. He walked with a slight limp, legacy of the same accident. And when the weather turned cold, that limp became pronounced enough that his youngest son had to help him up the porch steps. Every morning, Daniel woke at 5:30, made coffee in a percolator so old the bottom was worn thin, and sat at his kitchen table reading from a King James Bible his mother had given him in 1953. He'd read 1 chapter, drink his coffee black and strong, then step outside to watch the sun come up over Black Mountain. He'd smoke 1 cigarette, unfiltered Pall Mall rolled so tight it lasted 15 minutes, and then he'd start his day. Check the coal seam hidden 2 miles up Martin's Fork. Test the quality, monitor the extraction, collect the coal, and transfer it to trucks that would be sold to distributors as far away as Lexington and Cincinnati. He'd married Martha Jean Howard in 1955, right after his discharge from the Army. They had 6 sons, James, Robert, Michael, David, Thomas, and William, ranging in age from 32 down to 19. Martha was 53 now, a thin woman whose face had been worn smooth by worry, like a river stone polished by decades of current. She'd buried 2 of her own brothers in mining accidents, watched the town she grew up in slowly die, and now lived with the knowledge that her husband and sons were 1 informant away from federal prison. What Daniel valued most wasn't the money from coal extraction, though God knew they needed it with 6 adults to feed and no legitimate income. What he valued was the idea that a man could still make his own way in the world without bowing to government regulations, bank loans, or corporate bosses. His grandfather had worked coal during the boom years. His father had worked it during the Depression. Daniel saw it as inheritance, tradition, survival, all rolled into the smell of coal dust and the black gold that came out of the earth piece by precious piece. The seam itself had cost him nothing in money, but everything in time and risk. He discovered it in 1976, a vein of bituminous coal running through a hollow that technically belonged to the state, but that nobody had worked in 15 years. Daniel had staked his claim the old way, the mountain way, by working it, by improving it, by making it his through sweat and blood, and the understanding that possession was 9/10 of the law in places where the law didn't reach. Over 3 years, he'd extracted maybe 40 tons of coal, sold it for maybe $30,000 total. That coal had kept his family fed when there was nothing else, had paid for his youngest son's braces, had kept the lights on and the heat running through winters that would have been deadly otherwise. That coal seam represented everything: his family's future, his independence, his defiance of a world that had taken everything else from him. The Garrett family lived 4 miles east up near the old Clovertown mining camp. Tommy Lee Garrett was 38, built thick and strong with a red beard he kept trimmed close, and hands missing 2 fingers on the right side. Lost them to a conveyor belt malfunction in 1979. He ran a small mechanic shop out of his garage, fixing trucks and ATVs for cash. No receipts, no taxes. His younger brothers, Wayne, Bobby, Carl, Marcus, and Kevin, all worked odd jobs, scraped by, survived in the ruins of coal country's collapse, just like everyone else. These weren't criminals by nature, weren't cartel members or organized gangsters. They were men who'd grown up in the same hollers, attended the same schools, worked in the same mines until the mines shut down. Tommy Garrett's wife, Susan, had been 3 years behind Martha Morgan in high school. Bobby Garrett and Michael Morgan had played basketball together. Their families had never been close. 4 miles of mountain terrain and different church affiliations kept most families isolated. But they weren't enemies either, just neighbors in the Appalachian sense, aware of each other's existence, occasionally crossing paths at the hardware store or the post office. Tommy's father had done some coal work back in the 60s, had staked claims on several seams, had made decent money before the big companies bought up the mineral rights. Tommy swore he'd never touch the business. Too much risk, too much conflict, but times were desperate. His oldest son needed braces they couldn't afford. His daughter wanted to go to community college. And when you're watching your family slip deeper into poverty every month, principles start to feel like luxuries you can't afford. That's where the coal seam came in. Word traveled through Harlan County like water running downhill. Who had money, who had resources, who might be persuaded to part with either for the right price. The Morgan seam was legendary. High-quality bituminous, easy to access, worth maybe $30,000 if you could extract it all. To someone like Tommy Garrett, that seam represented a way out. Extract it, take the cash, maybe move the family to Lexington or Knoxville, where jobs still existed. The seam was discovered by Tommy's crew on the night of September 18th, 1979. They'd been exploring hollows, looking for any coal they could find, any way to make money, and they'd stumbled onto Daniel Morgan's operation. Not the main seam, but evidence of it. Fresh coal dust, recent extraction marks, a path worn through the forest by repeated trips. Tommy had recognized it immediately for what it was: a working claim, someone else's livelihood, someone else's family's survival. He could have walked away, should have walked away, but desperation is a powerful thing, and Tommy Garrett was desperate. He'd gone home that night and told his brothers what he'd found. They discussed it over beers and cigarettes, the way men do when they're considering crossing a line they know they shouldn't cross. By morning, they'd made their decision. They'd work the seam themselves. They'd extract as much coal as they could before anyone noticed. They'd take the money and disappear. What Tommy Garrett didn't understand, what he couldn't have understood, was that he wasn't just stealing coal. He was stealing Daniel Morgan's family's survival. He was stealing the only thing keeping them fed. He was stealing hope, and in the mountains, where the law was distant and unreliable, where men handled their own problems, stealing a man's livelihood was considered one of the gravest violations possible. On September 22nd, 1979, a Saturday afternoon, Daniel Morgan drove his 1979 Ford pickup to the coal seam to check on his work. The weather was clear, temperature in the mid-60s, the kind of perfect autumn day that made you forget about the hardship waiting in winter. He parked his truck a quarter-mile away and walked the familiar path through the forest, boots crunching on fallen leaves, breath steady and even. When he reached the seam, he knew immediately something was wrong. The extraction site had been disturbed, fresh coal dust on the ground, new marks on the rock face where someone had been working, tools he didn't recognize, and worst of all, maybe 2 tons of coal missing, coal he'd extracted and left stacked, waiting for the right time to transport it. Daniel stood in that clearing for 20 minutes, just staring at the evidence of theft. His breathing came shallow and fast. His hands opened and closed at his sides. When he finally walked back down the mountain to his truck, his mind had already made the calculations. There were only 3 families in Harlan County who knew the location of that seam. Only 3 families who had the trucks and manpower to extract coal in the middle of the night. And one of those families, the Garretts, had been asking questions about coal prices at the scrapyard in Middlesboro 2 weeks earlier. On September 23rd, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Daniel Morgan drove his 1979 Ford pickup into the parking lot of Tommy Garrett's mechanic shop. Tommy was under a Chevy truck, legs sticking out, impact wrench, screaming. Daniel waited, didn't call out, just waited until Tommy rolled out on his creeper board and saw Boots standing beside his toolbox. "Daniel," Tommy said, getting to his feet, wiping his hands on a rag. "What brings you by?" "My seam," Daniel said, voice flat, no anger yet. "Something's wrong. Unfortunate. But I don't know nothing about your business, Daniel. I'm giving you until 4 o'clock tomorrow," Daniel said. "Sundown on September 24th. Return what's mine. We forget this happened. Don't return it." He let the sentence hang in the air between them like smoke. Tommy straightened up, 6 inches shorter than Daniel, but wider through the shoulders. "You threatening me?" "I'm giving you fair warning," Daniel said. "Mountain rules. You know them same as me. Man steals another man's livelihood. That debt gets settled." He turned, climbed back in his truck, and drove away. Didn't look back. 3 witnesses saw the whole exchange. 2 customers at the shop, and Bobby Garrett, who'd been working on a carburetor inside the garage, and heard every word. That conversation spread through Harlan County within hours. By sunset, everyone knew the Morgans and the Garretts were headed for trouble, but people had been predicting feuds and violence in Harlan County for 100 years. Mostly, it was talk. Mostly men backed down before things went too far. Mostly, what Daniel Morgan didn't know was that his ultimatum would set in motion a chain of events that would leave 16 people dead, 11 men facing life in federal prison, and a small Kentucky county marked forever by one night when honor and desperation collided in the darkness of the Cumberland Mountains. The deadline came and went, like a stone dropping into dark water. September 24th, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Daniel Morgan stood on his front porch, watching the sun sink behind Little Black Mountain, and the coal remained stolen. No truck pulled up his driveway, no phone call came, no Garrett brother appeared to make things right. Just silence, and the slow understanding that Tommy Garrett had made his choice. Martha appeared in the doorway behind him, drying her hands on a dish towel. "Maybe they don't have it, Daniel. Maybe you're wrong." Daniel didn't turn around. "I'm not wrong." "Then call the sheriff. Let the law handle it." "Sheriff's 40 miles away. By the time he drives out here, takes statements, files paperwork, if he even bothers, that coal will be sold and scattered across 3 counties. Besides," he finally looked at her, "you know how this works. Mountain handles mountain." Martha's face went pale. She knew what that meant. Everyone in Harlan County knew what that meant. "Daniel, please think about the boys." "I am thinking about the boys. What kind of man lets someone steal his family's livelihood and does nothing? What kind of father teaches his sons that you can be robbed and just accept it?" He turned back to watch the sunset. Martha heard her crying in the kitchen, but didn't follow. Some decisions you make alone. 3 days earlier, on the Thursday before everything fell apart, Daniel had driven into town with his youngest son, William. They'd gone to the hardware store for fence staples, stopped at the post office, grabbed lunch at the diner on Main Street. Normal things, father and son running errands like they'd done 100 times before. William was 19, still young enough to believe the future held something better than Harlan County's slow collapse. He'd been talking about joining the army, not because he wanted to, but because it was the only way out he could see. Recruiters promised training, steady pay, college money afterward, a ladder up from the pit their town had become. They sat in a booth at the back of the diner, red vinyl cracked and patched with duct tape, ceiling fan wobbling overhead. The place smelled like fried grease and weak coffee. William ordered a cheeseburger and fries. Daniel got the meatloaf special, same thing he always got. "Dad," William said, pouring ketchup on his fries, "you think I should go to the army? I mean, really?" Daniel chewed slowly, thinking. Outside the window, Main Street sat mostly empty. Half the storefronts were boarded up. The movie theater had closed 2 years back. Even the bank had reduced its hours to 3 days a week, because there wasn't enough business to justify staying open. "I think," Daniel said finally, "a man does what he has to do to take care of himself. If the army gives you a future, then yeah, you should go." He met his son's eyes. "But you remember where you come from. Remember what matters. Family, honor, your word. Don't let them strip that out of you." William nodded. "Serious." "I'm serious, Will." Daniel smiled, reached across, and squeezed his son's shoulder. "You're a good boy. Going to make something of yourself." That was Thursday afternoon. On Sunday, Daniel discovered the coal was gone. On Monday, he confronted Tommy Garrett. And now, Sunday evening, William would be helping load rifles into the back of his father's truck, his future in the army evaporating before it even began. The preparations started Tuesday morning. Daniel woke before dawn and drove to his brother-in-law's place 12 miles away, up near Everts. Frank Howard was 62, retired from the mines with black lungs so bad he could barely climb stairs, but he still kept an impressive gun collection. Relics from better times when men hunted to feed their families and bought quality weapons they could pass down to sons and grandsons. Frank sat on his porch, oxygen tank beside his chair, breathing through clear plastic tubes. "Daniel, awful early for visiting. Need to borrow some hardware, Frank. The Garrett stole from me. I gave them a chance to make it right. They chose wrong." Frank was quiet for a long time, wheezing through his damaged lungs. Finally, "How many you need?" "Enough for 11 men." "Jesus, Daniel, they crossed the line." "They did. Frank, I can't let it stand." Frank struggled to his feet, shuffled inside. Came back 10 minutes later with 2 rifles, a Remington 700 in .306, and a Marlin lever action in .308. "These are yours to keep. Consider them a gift. But Daniel," he gripped Daniel's arm with surprising strength, "you do this. There's no coming back. You understand that?" "I understand." "Your boys will go to prison. You'll die in prison. Martha will be alone." "I know." Frank let go, shaking his head. "Garrett should have returned that coal." Over the next 3 days, Daniel quietly assembled an arsenal. His own deer rifle, a Winchester model, 70 in .306. James had a Remington 870 shotgun, 12 gauge. Robert owned a .357 Magnum revolver he bought at a pawn shop in Middlesbrough. Michael had inherited their grandfather's Springfield .306 from World War II. The nephews, Lucas, Frank Jr., Henry, and Samuel, all had hunting weapons accumulated over years of deer season and target practice. Daniel didn't buy anything new, didn't need to. This was Appalachia, where every household owned guns, the way city people owned umbrellas, necessary tools for a hard environment. But he did buy ammunition. 3 boxes of .306, 2 boxes of .308, 4 boxes of 12-gauge buckshot, and 50 rounds of .357. He spread the purchases across 4 different stores. 1 in Harland, 1 in Cumberland, 1 in Middlesbrough, 1 in Pineville. Paid cash, kept the receipts in a coffee can under the kitchen sink. Some part of him still believed in documentation, in proving he'd done things legally right up until the moment he didn't. Wednesday afternoon, Daniel spread topographic maps across his kitchen table. Maps from the Forest Service, showing every ridge, hollow, and creek in eastern Harlan County. He'd been walking these mountains since he was 5 years old, knew them in daylight, knew them in darkness. But planning required precision. He marked the Garrett compound with a red X, marked the escape routes with the yellow highlighter, marked where each of his men would position themselves with blue circles. James stood beside him, studying the maps. "This is military, Dad, like Vietnam. Vietnam taught me how to stay alive when people were trying to end me," Daniel said. "Taught me patience. Taught me that emotion gets you caught, but planning gets you home." He tapped the map. "We do this right. Nobody gets hurt that doesn't deserve it. And if they have weapons, if they fight back," Daniel looked at his oldest son, "then we fight harder." At that moment, while Daniel Morgan and his sons planned in their kitchen, Tommy Garrett was working late in his garage, replacing a transmission on a Ford Ranger, completely unaware that 11 men had decided he and his entire family were marked for elimination. The impact wrench screamed. Classic rock played on a paint-splattered radio. His youngest daughter brought him a sandwich around 7. Normal Wednesday evening, normal life. He went to bed that night thinking about the transmission job, about whether he could finish it by Friday, about the $80 it would bring in. He didn't think about Daniel Morgan at all. Thursday evening, Daniel sat alone in his barn. The building smelled like motor oil, old hay, and the accumulated dust of 30 years. A single work light hung from a beam, casting long shadows. On the workbench in front of him lay his Winchester Model 70, disassembled for cleaning. His hands moved automatically. Bore brush, cleaning rod, solvent, patches. He'd cleaned this rifle 1,000 times, knew every scratch in the stock, every wear mark on the barrel. His father had used this rifle to hunt deer every November from 1952 until the cancer took him in 1981. Daniel had inherited it, used it to feed his own family during the lean years. Now, he was about to use it for something his father never imagined. He thought about prison, federal prison, probably. They'd charge him with murder, multiple counts, premeditated, life without parole if he was lucky, death penalty if the prosecution pushed hard enough. He was 52 years old. Even if they gave him life, he'd die in a cell. Never see Martha again except through plexiglass during visiting hours. Never see his grandchildren when they eventually came. Never walk these mountains at dawn, breathing cold air that smelled like pine and creek water. All of that gone for coal, for $30,000. For the principle that a man doesn't let himself be robbed. He could stop, could call Tommy Garrett right now, say, "Forget it, let bygones be bygones." Could drive to Middlesbrough tomorrow, talk to the sheriff, file a proper report. Let the law handle it like Martha wanted. Might take months, might not go anywhere, but at least he'd stay free, stay home. But then he thought about standing in that clearing, staring at the empty space where his coal had been. Thought about 3 years of work gone in one night. Thought about Tommy Garrett's face when he'd said, "I don't know nothing about your business." The lie so casual, so easy, like Daniel's livelihood meant nothing. Thought about his sons watching, learning what their father did when someone crossed him. No, some things mattered more than freedom, more than life itself. Honor, respect, the lesson that actions had consequences. Daniel reassembled the rifle, loaded 5 rounds into the magazine, and set it aside. Then he started on James's shotgun. There was no turning back now. Friday night, Daniel's sons and nephews gathered at the house. Martha cooked dinner. Fried chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans from the garden, biscuits with butter and honey, the kind of meal she made for special occasions. Nobody talked about why they were all there. Nobody mentioned the rifles being cleaned in the barn, the ammunition boxes stacked on the workbench, the map spread across Daniel's truck seat. They ate like normal, talked about normal things. William mentioned a girl he'd met at the gas station. Robert talked about fixing his carburetor. Michael complained about the weather turning cold, his arthritis acting up already. Family dinner, last supper. After the meal, Daniel stood up. "Boys, nephews, go on home, get some rest. Tomorrow night, we handle our business." They all knew what that meant. Nobody asked questions. Nobody suggested alternatives. They'd been raised in these mountains, taught the old codes. When someone steals from you, you settle the debt. When someone disrespects your family, you answer. The law might not understand, but the mountains did. One by one, they left. James was last. He stood on the porch, keys in his hand, looking back at his father. "Dad, you sure about this? We could still." "James, go home. Kiss your wife, hold your kids. I'll see you tomorrow." James nodded, got in his truck, drove away. Taillights disappeared down the driveway, swallowed by October darkness. Daniel stood on the porch for a long time, smoking cigarettes and watching the stars come out. The temperature had dropped to 42 degrees. His breath made small clouds in the air. Somewhere distant, a dog howled. The mountains were so quiet, you could hear the creek running half a mile away. Constant whisper of water over stone. Martha came outside wrapped in a cardigan sweater. She didn't say anything, just stood beside him. After 5 minutes of silence, she spoke. "I'll wait for you, however long it takes. I'll wait." Daniel turned, looked at his wife of 32 years. Her face lined with age and worry, hair gray now, instead of the black it had been when they married. She'd stood by him through everything, through mining accidents, through unemployment, through the slow death of their town, and now she'd stand by him through this. He pulled her close, kissed her forehead. "You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Martha Jean." She was crying. He felt tears on his shirt. "Please don't go." "I have to." "No, you don't. You're choosing to." "Same thing," he said, and it was. At 10:30, Daniel walked through the dark house, checked on William's room, empty. His son was staying with Lucas that night, part of the plan, stood in the doorway of the bedroom he'd shared with Martha for 3 decades. Smelled like her lavender soap and the cedar chest at the foot of the bed. He memorized it all, the quilt her mother had made, the photographs on the dresser, the way moonlight came through the curtain. This was goodbye to his home, his life, everything. Martha was sitting at the kitchen table when he came downstairs. She didn't look up. "Daniel, don't." Her voice broke. "Don't say anything else. Just go." Daniel picked up his truck keys, walked to the door, stopped with his hand on the knob. "Martha, don't." Daniel walked out into the night, started his truck. The engine sounded too loud in the silence. He looked back at the house, lights on in the kitchen, Martha's silhouette visible through the window. He raised his hand once, didn't know if she saw it. Then he drove toward the rendezvous point, where 10 other men were waiting with rifles, and the shared understanding that by sunrise, nothing would ever be the same again. At 11:47 p.m., on September 24th, 1979, Daniel Morgan pulled his truck into a clearing 2 miles from the Garrett compound. 10 other vehicles were already there. His sons, his nephews, all armed, all ready. They stood in the darkness, breath steaming in the cold air, and waited for their father to give the order that would transform them from coal miners and mechanics into something else entirely. What happened in the next 6 hours would leave 16 people dead and mark Harlan County forever, with the blood of mountain justice gone too far. 11:47 p.m., Saturday, September 24th, 1979. Temperature had dropped to 38 degrees. The moon was a waning crescent, providing almost no light, just enough to see shapes moving through trees, but not faces. Fog rolled down from Black Mountain, thick and cold, turning the forest into something from a ghost story. The only sounds were wind moving through bare branches and the distant trickle of Martin's Fork Creek, half a mile down the hollow. Daniel Morgan sat in his truck, engine off, hands resting on the steering wheel. Through the trees ahead, maybe 400 yards distant, he could see the Garrett compound, 3 trailers arranged in a rough triangle. A single yellow security light, casting long shadows. Through one window, the blue flicker of a television. Saturday night, family home, probably watching a movie, settling in for the evening, completely unaware that 11 armed men were positioning themselves in the darkness. Daniel's breathing came slow and steady. He'd expected his heart to race, expected fear, or maybe even last-minute doubt. Instead, he felt nothing but cold purpose. Like he'd already stepped outside himself, like he was watching Daniel Morgan, the one about to become something he could never come back from. From a great distance, he picked up his Winchester Model 70, opened the chamber, confirmed the round was seated properly, closed it with a quiet click, breathed the cold air deep into his lungs. "Dad," James said from the passenger seat, "last chance." Daniel looked at his oldest son, 32 years old, face already lined from hard living. Good man, devoted father, about to throw his life away because his father had decided honor mattered more than freedom. "We're past that point," Daniel said. "Been past it since Tuesday." James nodded. "Then let's finish this." Daniel opened the door, dome light disabled hours ago, and stepped into October darkness. 10 other doors opened simultaneously, 11 men, armed and silent, moving through fog like shadows. They'd rehearsed this, knew their positions. Daniel and James would take the main trailer. Robert and Michael would take the second. David and Thomas would take the third. The nephews, Lucas, Frank, Henry, and Samuel, would secure the perimeter, cut off escape routes, handle anyone who ran. Military precision. Vietnam had taught Daniel that chaos gets you caught, but discipline gets you home. Tonight, discipline would get 16 men eliminated and 11 Morgans to prison for life. Fair trade, in Daniel's mind. They moved through forest without speaking, using hand signals Daniel had learned 35 years ago in a jungle on the other side of the world. Temperature kept dropping. Daniel's breath made small clouds in the air. His boots crunched on frost-covered leaves. Behind him, James's breathing was controlled, steady. His son had always been good under pressure. At 11:52 p.m., they reached the tree line. The Garrett compound sat in a clearing maybe 50 yards across. The security light buzzed, insects circling it despite the cold. From the main trailer, Daniel heard laughter. Television audience. Sitcom rerun probably. From the second trailer, music. Country station. Someone listening to Merle Haggard. The third trailer was dark, silent. Daniel raised his hand. Everyone froze, waited, listened. No dogs. The Garretts had 3 dogs. But Daniel's nephew, Frank, had handled that problem earlier. Poisoned meat left by the road. Cruel, but necessary. Dogs bark. Barking alerts neighbors. This needed to happen fast and quiet. Daniel lowered his hand, the signal to move. At 11:55 p.m., they crossed the clearing. 11 men, rifles ready, spreading out like they'd planned. Daniel and James reached the main trailer first. Daniel put his hand on the aluminum door, cold metal under his palm. This was it. Last possible moment to turn around, to wake the Garretts, tell them he'd changed his mind, leave without bloodshed. He opened the door instead. Tommy Garrett sat on a worn couch, beer in one hand, watching television. He turned at the sound of the door opening, saw Daniel, saw the Winchester. Understanding came to his face slowly. Confusion first, then recognition, then fear. Daniel, what the hell? You had your chance, Daniel said, voice flat, empty. Deadline was 4 o'clock. Sunset 6 hours ago. Tommy started to stand. The Winchester barked once. Tommy fell backward over the couch, beer bottles shattering on linoleum floor. The television kept playing, canned laughter from a show nobody was watching anymore. Daniel heard screaming from the bedroom. Susan Garrett. James moved toward the hallway, but Daniel grabbed his arm. Women and children don't matter, just the men. She saw us, Dad. She can identify. Women and children, Daniel repeated. That's the line. They left Susan screaming in the bedroom and moved to the second trailer. 12:03 a.m. Bobby Garrett was in his kitchen making a sandwich. Bologna and cheese, bread and mayonnaise spread across the counter. He wore pajama pants and a Harlan County High School t-shirt. 28 years old, worked at the Ford dealership in Middlesboro, fixed transmissions, dreamed of opening his own shop someday. He turned when they entered, saw the rifles, dropped the knife he was holding. Jesus Christ, Daniel, this is insane. Your brother stole from me, Daniel said. You stood by and let it happen. I didn't know nothing about any Cole, I swear. You're a Garrett, that makes you guilty. Bobby raised his hands, backing toward the sink. Man, please, I got 2 kids, little girls. They're sleeping right there. He pointed toward a closed door. Daniel felt something crack in his chest. Girls, innocent, like his own granddaughters when they eventually came. He looked at James, who was staring at that closed door, with an expression Daniel couldn't read. You got 30 seconds to say goodbye, Daniel said. Bobby's face went white. You can't just... 25 seconds. Bobby stumbled toward the bedroom door, opened it. Daniel heard children's voices, groggy, confused. Heard Bobby's voice breaking, as he told them he loved them. Told them to stay in their room, no matter what they heard. Told them to be brave. The door closed. Bobby came back out, tears on his face. They're babies, Daniel. You do this. You make them orphans. Should have thought about that before your family crossed me. Daniel's rifle cut him off mid-sentence. Bobby Garrett fell beside his unfinished sandwich. Mayonnaise jar on its side, white cream spreading across the counter. The refrigerator hummed. From the bedroom, one of the girls started crying. Daniel and James walked out. Behind them, the crying got louder. Outside, The fog had thickened. Daniel could barely see 20 feet. He heard gunshots from the third trailer, Robert and Michael handling their targets. Heard shouting, more shots, then silence. At 12:17 a.m., Daniel found himself at the mechanic's garage, behind the main trailer. Wayne Garrett was there, 26 years old, newest father in the family, daughter just 8 months old. He'd been working late on a carburetor, trying to finish a rush job for Monday morning. His back to the door when Daniel entered. Wayne turned, wrench in his hand, saw Daniel, understood. Oh God, oh Jesus, no. Wayne dropped the wrench. It clanged on concrete. Daniel, please, I got a baby, 8 months old, little girl named Emma, she's... I know, Daniel said. Had seen the baby at the grocery store 2 weeks ago. Cute kid. Tommy's wife had been showing her off to everyone. Then how can you? Because this is bigger than one baby. This is about my family, my sons, my legacy. You Garretts took that from me. We didn't take nothing. Your brother stole $30,000 worth of coal from me. Coal that fed my family. And when I gave him a chance to make it right, he spit in my face. Wayne's hands were shaking. I didn't know about no coal. I work at the garage. I fix cars. I don't... You're a Garrett. That's enough. Wayne tried to run. Made it maybe 3 steps before Daniel's shot dropped him beside a '79 Chevy truck with the hood open and tools scattered across the engine block. The portable radio on the workbench kept playing. Hank Williams singing about being so lonesome he could cry. Daniel stood there, rifle still raised, looking at a 26-year-old man who'd never see his daughter turn one. Waited for guilt, for horror, for anything human. Felt only the cold satisfaction of another name crossed off the list. At that moment, while Daniel Morgan moved through the Garrett compound, eliminating targets with mechanical efficiency, 4 miles away, at the Little Inn Bed and Breakfast on Main Street in Harland, an elderly couple from Ohio was sleeping peacefully. They'd come to Kentucky for the fall colors, to see the mountains in October, to hike Kingdom Come State Park. Tomorrow, they'd wake up to pancakes and coffee, drive scenic back roads, take photographs. They'd never know that while they slept, 16 men were being eliminated in the darkness beyond town. Would never know how close violence had been while they dreamed of autumn leaves and mountain views. 12:28 a.m. Carl Garrett was in the third trailer, sleeping on a couch with the television on, 45 years old, Tommy's uncle, Vietnam veteran like Daniel. He'd been at Khe Sanh in '68, same year Daniel was at Dang. Different battles, same war. They'd bonded over that once years ago, at a county fair, talking about things only soldiers understood. Carl woke when Robert kicked the door open, saw the shotgun, didn't reach for the .38 Special on the coffee table, knew he'd be dead before his fingers touched it. Morgan, Carl said, not a question, just acknowledgement. Carl, a long moment of silence. 2 veterans who'd survived a war together now, on opposite sides of something uglier. You really going to do this? Over coal. It was never about the coal, Robert said. It was about respect. Tommy was an idiot. Whole family knows it. But you're killing all of us for one man's mistake. You're a Garrett. That's the mistake. Carl's face hardened. You know what they'll do to you for this. Federal prison. Life sentence. You'll die in a cage. I know. Then why? Because my father asked. Because family matters. Because when someone crosses a Morgan, they pay. Carl reached for his pistol, slow, deliberate, giving Robert a chance to stop this. Robert didn't. The shotgun blast cut Carl off mid-reach. He fell sideways off the couch, the .38 Special still on the table, untouched. Robert stood there, shotgun still aimed, looking at a man who'd fought for his country, same as his father had. Felt nothing but empty space where emotions used to be. Outside, Daniel was counting. 7 dead, 9 more to go. 3 names remained on his list. 3 men who at that moment were waking to sounds of gunfire, completely unaware that running would only delay the inevitable by minutes. 12:44 a.m. Marcus Garrett, 19 years old, bolted from the third trailer, wearing only boxer shorts and a t-shirt, barefoot, running blind through fog and darkness. He made it maybe 200 yards before Samuel Morgan caught him at the tree line. Marcus fell to his knees, hands raised. Please, I'm just a kid. I ain't done nothing to nobody. Samuel, 24, 5 years older, looked down at him. You're a Garrett. That ain't my fault. I didn't choose my family. Neither did we. Marcus tried to stand, to run. Samuel's rifle spoke once. Marcus fell forward into dead leaves and didn't move. Fog swirled around his body. Somewhere, an owl called. Normal mountain sounds continuing, while horror unfolded beneath them. 1:03 a.m. Daniel and James found Kevin Garrett in the second trailer, trying to load a hunting rifle with shaking hands. 29 years old, father of 3. The rifle clattered to the floor when he saw them enter. Daniel, Jesus. Daniel, please. Your brother stole from me, Daniel said. You stood by and let it happen. I didn't steal nothing. You're a Garrett. Kevin dropped to his knees. Actually begged, tears running down his face. Please, I'll do anything. I'll pay you back. I'll work for free. You'll die like the rest of your family. James hesitated, looked at his father. Dad, maybe we don't. James, do your job. James raised the rifle. Kevin closed his eyes, started praying. Our Father, who art in heaven, voice breaking on every word. The shot cut him off mid-prayer. Daniel watched his son lower the rifle, saw something die in James's eyes, something that would never come back. His boy had killed before, deer mostly, but never a man, never someone begging on their knees. That kind of killing changed you, made you into something your mother wouldn't recognize. I'm sorry, Daniel said quietly. James didn't respond, just walked out into the fog. Daniel stood alone in the trailer. Around him, evidence of a family's life. Photographs on the walls, children's drawings on the refrigerator, a birthday cake in a box on the counter, Kevin's body on the floor, blood spreading across worn linoleum. These hands had delivered calves during difficult births, had helped neighbors raise barns, had held his wife on their wedding night. Now, they were a killer's hands. 1:15 a.m. The fog was so thick, Daniel could barely see his own boots. He heard shots in the distance, Robert and Michael finishing their work, heard someone screaming, then silence. He sat on the steps of the main trailer, Winchester across his knees. His hands shook now, not from fear, from the terrible understanding that there was no going back. He'd crossed a line no human being should cross, become something worse than the people he'd always feared and judged. Around him, October night continued unchanged. Wind moved through trees. Fog rolled, stars invisible through the clouds. The universe shone cold and indifferent above. The universe didn't care that Daniel Morgan had just destroyed 14 families. It just kept turning. At 1:33 a.m., Daniel found the last 3 Garrett men hiding together in the mechanic's garage. Raymond, Douglas, and Frank Jr., cousins who decided to make their stand together. They had 2 rifles and a shotgun between them, stood behind the Chevy truck, using it as cover. Morgan, Raymond shouted, you killed enough people tonight. Just leave. We won't tell nobody nothing. Daniel stepped into the garage. Behind him, all 9 nephews and sons spread out, surrounding the building. Can't do that, Raymond. Why not? You got your revenge. You proved your point. Haven't finished yet. We didn't do nothing. You're Garrett's. That's enough. Raymond raised his rifle. So did Douglas. Frank Jr. held the shotgun with trembling hands. You'll have to go through us, Raymond said. I know. For a moment, nobody moved. 3 Garretts, 11 Morgans. Outcome inevitable. But Raymond had pride, had honor. Same code Daniel operated under. The code that said, you don't go quiet. You fight back. You make them pay for every inch. Hell of a thing, Raymond said, dying over coal. It was never about the coal, Daniel said. It was about you looking at me like I was nothing. About me asking for help and getting spit on. So this makes you the good guy, killing 16 people? No, but it makes me the guy who fought back, who didn't roll over. They looked at each other, final moment. 2 men who'd lived in the same county their whole lives, who'd shared the same mountains and the same hard times, now facing each other over rifles in a mechanic's garage that smelled of oil and metal shavings. I'm sorry it came to this, Daniel said. No, you're not. Raymond was right. Daniel wasn't sorry. They fired simultaneously. 3 Garretts, 11 Morgans. The garage erupted in muzzle flashes and thunder. Bullets punched through metal, shattered windows, tore through the wooden walls. The fight lasted maybe 10 seconds, felt like hours. When the echoes faded, Raymond, Douglas, and Frank Jr. lay on the concrete floor, not moving, blood mixing with oil stains. The radio was still playing, someone singing about whiskey and heartbreak. Daniel stood there, rifle still raised, looking at three men he'd known his entire life, waited for guilt, for horror, for something human, felt nothing but exhaustion. 1:38 a.m. 16 men were dead. The worst mass elimination in Appalachian history was over. Daniel walked back through fog to his truck. His boots left prints in frost-covered grass. Someone would see them later, would follow them, would know exactly where the shooter had walked. Didn't matter. He wasn't running. Behind him, his sons and nephews emerged from the compound. All of them silent. All of them changed forever. William, the youngest, was crying. Michael looked like he might throw up. James's face had gone completely blank. The expression soldiers get when they've seen too much death. Daniel climbed into his truck, put the Winchester on the passenger seat. His hands finally shook uncontrollably. He looked at his palms stained with gunpowder residue and something darker. These hands had built fences, had changed his children's diapers, had held Martha when she cried about her brother dying in the mines. Now they were a killer's hands. James climbed into the passenger seat. William and Robert into the back, all of them smelling of gunpowder and death. "Dad," James said quietly, "what do we do now?" Daniel stared at the dark forest where dawn would break in a few hours, where the world would wake up to discover what they'd done, where federal agents would come with helicopters and dogs and warrants. "We go home, we clean up, we wait for them to come, and then we face what we did." Daniel started the engine. They drove away through fog and darkness. 11 men who'd crossed a line they could never uncross, carrying the weight of 16 dead and knowing they'd carry it for the rest of their lives. But the blood had been shed, the debt had been paid, and in 6 hours, when a Kentucky state trooper stopped to check on an abandoned truck on a logging road and discovered Wayne Garrett's body, Harlan County would wake to discover what happens when mountain justice, that old, brutal code, collides with federal law in the darkness of the Cumberland Mountains. 6 hours after the last shot echoed through the Cumberland Mountains, Kentucky State Trooper Gary Henderson pulled his patrol car onto a logging road 3 miles east of Clovertown. He'd received a call about an abandoned truck blocking the road. Probably poachers, probably nothing serious, just another routine October morning in Harlan County. Gary was 28 years old, 6 months out of the academy, still young enough to believe that police work in rural Kentucky meant writing speeding tickets and breaking up bar fights. He'd grown up in Lexington, requested assignment to the mountains because he wanted adventure, wanted to see the real Kentucky, the places tourists didn't go. He got out of his cruiser at 6:47 a.m. Temperature was 41 degrees, fog still thick in the hollows. His breath made small clouds in the air as he approached the abandoned Ford Ranger. Passenger door hanging open, keys in the ignition. Then he saw the body. Wayne Garrett lay on his back beside the truck, eyes open and staring at nothing. A dark stain spread across his Harlan County High School t-shirt. Flies had already found him despite the cold. Gary's training kicked in. Check for pulse, secure the scene, call for backup. But his hands were shaking so badly, he dropped his radio twice. He'd never seen a dead body outside a funeral home, never seen what a bullet does to a human being. He finally got the radio to his mouth. "Dispatch, this is Unit 12. I have a..." His voice cracked. He tried again. "I have a body, male gunshot wound. Logging Road 7, 3 miles east of Clovertown. I need..." He looked around, suddenly aware he was alone in the woods, with a corpse and maybe a shooter still nearby. "I need backup now." By 7:30 a.m., more calls came in. Frantic, confused, terrified. Susan Garrett had run 2 miles through forest in her nightgown, barefoot, bleeding from cuts on her feet. She stumbled onto Route 421 and flagged down a pickup truck driven by Howard Mills, who was heading to church. She was screaming about bodies, about the Morgans, about her husband eliminated in front of her while she hid in the bedroom. At 8:15 a.m., a jogger named Patricia Dean discovered Bobby Garrett's trailer. The front door was open. She called out, got no response, peered inside, saw the body, saw the mayonnaise jar on its side, heard a child crying from a closed bedroom. Patricia, 42 years old, mother of 3, backed away slowly, made it to her car, locked the doors, called 911 with hands that wouldn't stop shaking, waited 30 minutes for police to arrive, listening to those children crying, too terrified to go back inside. while Gary Henderson processed Wayne Garrett's crime scene with hands that still trembled, while Susan Garrett gave her statement to investigators through tears and shock, while Patricia Dean sat in her car, unable to stop hearing those children 40 miles away. In Harland, the Sunday morning crowd filled Betty's restaurant on Main Street. Biscuits and gravy, country ham and eggs, coffee refilled every 5 minutes. The early church crowd dressed in their Sunday best, talking about the weather turning cold, about the Wildcats game yesterday, about whether it would snow before Thanksgiving. Nobody knew yet that 16 families would never be whole again. Nobody knew that the worst mass killing in Appalachian history had happened just a few miles away while they slept. Normal Sunday morning, pancakes and prayer, life continuing, oblivious to death. Harlan County Sheriff Randall Pierce was 56 years old, 32 years wearing the badge. He dealt with moonshine busts, domestic violence, occasional bar fights that turned deadly. He'd pulled bodies from mine collapses and car wrecks. He'd seen poverty grind people down until they did desperate things. But when his dispatcher called him at home at 7:45 a.m. and said there were reports of multiple bodies near Clovertown, he knew this was different. He arrived at the Garrett compound at 8:30 a.m. FBI Special Agent Raymond Cross was already there, called in from Knoxville the moment the body count exceeded 3. Cross was 47, 20 years with the Bureau, had investigated everything from bank robberies to domestic terrorism. Pierce found Tommy Garrett first, then Bobby, then Wayne, then Carl, then Marcus, then Kevin, then the 3 in the garage. Raymond, Douglas, and Frank Jr. 16 bodies in one location, multiple locations scattered through the surrounding forest. Sheriff Pierce, who'd known Tommy Garrett since the man was in diapers, stood in the center of that compound and felt his understanding of Harlan County fundamentally shift. This wasn't coal theft. Violence wasn't a feud escalating slowly over years. This was systematic, planned, executed with military precision. By noon, the FBI had turned the Garrett compound into a command center. Evidence markers everywhere, photographers documenting everything. Medical examiner beginning the grim work of body collection. Agent Cross walked the perimeter, studying angles, reconstructing events. He'd been with the Bureau long enough to recognize patterns. This wasn't passion, wasn't rage. Rage was chaotic, sloppy, emotional. This was coordinated. "Sheriff," Cross said, crouching beside shell casings near the garage, "I count at least 8 different weapons, multiple calibers, multiple shooters. This was coordinated." Pierce nodded. Daniel Morgan served in Vietnam, got military training. His sons, some of them did time in the service too. How many Morgans we talking about? Daniel, 6 sons, 4 nephews. That's 11 men, all adults, all capable of handling firearms. Cross stood up, looked at the 3 trailers, then at the forest beyond. Timeline. Susan Garrett says they came around midnight. She heard Tommy eliminated first. After that, chaos. Shots from multiple directions. She hid in the bedroom closet with her daughters. Saved their lives. So we're looking at what? 2 hours? Maybe 3. Probably less. These weren't random hits. They knew exactly where everyone was, who to target. Cross walked to the main trailer, studied the bullet holes in the aluminum siding. This wasn't elimination, Sheriff. This was warfare. Small unit tactics, perimeter security, coordinated assault. Someone planned this like a military operation. Over the next 48 hours, investigators worked around the clock, interviewed everyone in Harlan County who knew either family, analyzed shell casings, bullet trajectories, tire tracks in the frost. The pattern emerged Tuesday afternoon. Evidence recovered. 73 shell casings total. Mix of .306 rifle, .308 rifle, 12-gauge shotgun, .357 Magnum. Ballistics confirmed they came from at least 8 different weapons, all hunting firearms, all legally owned in Harlan County. Timeline tight. Approximately 11:45 p.m. Saturday to 1:40 a.m. Sunday. Less than 2 hours for 16 eliminations. Multiple locations. Suspects identified. Daniel Morgan and family. Witnesses placed Daniel confronting Tommy Garrett in town on September 23rd. 3 people heard Daniel's ultimatum. Return what's mine by sundown. September 24th, or we settle this mountain style. But it was the motive that stunned everyone. Deputy Sheriff Mike Bradley, found it in Daniel Morgan's kitchen on Tuesday morning. A coffee can under the sink. Inside, receipts for ammunition purchases and a handwritten note dated September 22nd. They stole my coal, $30,000, took my family's livelihood, gave them fair warning, they chose this. That was it. 16 men eliminated over coal. Agent Cross stood in the Morgan kitchen holding that note and felt something close to disbelief. $30,000. That's what this was about. Sheriff Pierce sat at the kitchen table, looking 20 years older than he had Sunday morning. It wasn't about the money, it was about respect, about mountain code. You don't steal from a man's family and walk away. That's not a legal defense. No, but it's an explanation. Pierce looked at Cross. You're not from here. You don't understand how these mountains work. There's law, and then there's code, and sometimes the code matters more. Not to federal prosecutors, it doesn't. I know. Pierce stood up, walked to the window. Outside, Martha Morgan was sitting on the porch steps, staring at nothing. Her husband and sons were about to be arrested. Her life was ending. But ask yourself this, Agent Cross. If someone stole $30,000 from you, and the law was 40 miles away, and didn't care, and you had to watch your family starve, what would you do? Cross didn't answer, didn't need to. They both knew the uncomfortable truth. Most people were closer to Daniel Morgan's breaking point than they wanted to admit. By Tuesday evening, the news had spread beyond Harlan County. State news picked it up. National media arrived Wednesday morning. CNN, ABC, NBC, all descending on a small Appalachian town to cover the worst mass killing in Kentucky history. The community split immediately. At Betty's restaurant, conversations grew heated. Some said Daniel Morgan was a monster who'd eliminated 16 men in cold blood. Others said he was a desperate father driven to extreme measures by thieves who'd violated mountain code. I ain't saying what he did was right, Earl Hopkins told a reporter from the Lexington Herald-Leader. Earl owned the hardware store, had known Daniel for 40 years. But I understand it. Man works his whole life. Economy collapses. Coal industry dies. And then someone steals the one thing keeping his family fed. Something's going to break. We're all closer to that breaking point than anyone wants to admit. The Garrett family survivors demanded maximum punishment, death penalty. No mercy for the men who'd eliminated their fathers, brothers, sons. But quietly, privately, more than a few Harlan County residents admitted they understood Daniel's rage, even if they couldn't condone his actions. The code ran deep in these mountains. Theft of livelihood was still, in some minds, a capital offense. At Harland Baptist Church on Sunday morning, 1 week after the massacre, Pastor William Crawford struggled through his sermon. We ask God, why? Why this violence? Why couldn't neighbors settle their differences without bloodshed? Why did mountain justice have to mean mountain slaughter? He had no answers, just grief, and the terrible knowledge that his congregation would be defined by this horror for generations. The town was divided, and everyone knew that whatever verdict eventually came, Harlan County would carry this scar forever. On Wednesday, October 31st, 7 days after the massacre, FBI agents, state police, and sheriff's deputies approached the Morgan property. 20 officers, body armor, rifles at the ready, expecting maybe a standoff, maybe a final shootout to end it all. What they found was Daniel Morgan sitting on his front porch, unarmed, hands visible. His 6 sons stood behind him, 4 nephews beside them, all unarmed, all calm, waiting. Sheriff Pierce, Daniel said as Randall Pierce got out of his vehicle. Figured you'd be coming about Saturday night. Daniel, I need you and your boys to come with us. We're not going to make this difficult. We did what needed doing. Now we'll answer for it. One by one, they filed out. James first, then Robert, then Michael, David, Thomas, William, then the nephews, Lucas, Frank, Henry, Samuel. Hands raised, no resistance, no weapons. Just 11 men who'd crossed the darkest line and now accepted the consequences with the same grim determination they'd shown when planning the operation. Sheriff Pierce put the handcuffs on Daniel Morgan personally. As he did, he asked the question he couldn't hold back. Was it worth it, Daniel? Daniel looked at his land, at the mountains he'd walked his entire life, at the home where he'd raised 6 sons and loved one woman for 32 years, at everything he was about to lose. "Ask me when I'm dying in prison," he said. "Then I'll tell you." They loaded all 11 men into transport vehicles. Martha Morgan watched from the porch, silent, tears running down her face. She didn't wave goodbye, didn't call out, just watched her entire family disappear down the driveway, knowing she'd never see them as free men again. But the question that haunted Agent Raymond Cross, the question that haunted Sheriff Randall Pierce, the question that haunted every person in Harlan County who'd grown up with mountain code running through their blood was simple and terrible. Where exactly was the line between justice and murder? Between defending your family and destroying 16 others? Between honor and massacre? And if they were honest with themselves, really honest, how many of them would have done exactly what Daniel Morgan did if pushed to that same desperate edge? The trial of Daniel Morgan and his 10 accomplices began in May of 1980 in a Lexington courtroom. The venue had been changed. There was no possibility of finding an impartial jury in Harlan County, where everyone knew everyone, where the mountain code ran too deep in people's blood for objective judgment. 140 combined charges of first-degree murder. The prosecution had confessions, forensic evidence, survivor testimony from Susan Garrett, and a timeline so detailed it left no room for reasonable doubt. Daniel Morgan himself had surrendered with the handwritten note still in his kitchen, a confession written in his own hand. The defense, 11 federal public defenders who looked overwhelmed from day one, attempted to argue extreme emotional disturbance brought on by economic desperation and cultural tradition. They painted a picture of men driven to extreme measures by a collapsing economy, by the theft of their only livelihood, by a code of honor that predated American law itself. They brought in sociologists who explained Appalachian honor culture, economists who testified about coal country's devastation, Vietnam veterans who spoke about Daniel's PTSD and military training. The prosecution destroyed that argument in under 2 hours. Emotional disturbance doesn't involve 4 days of planning, doesn't involve borrowing rifles from relatives, doesn't involve military-style coordination with perimeter security and assigned kill zones. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was premeditated mass elimination, dressed up in the language of mountain justice. The jury, 12 people from Lexington, who understood poverty but hadn't lived Harlan County's specific desperation, deliberated for 19 hours over 3 days. Guilty. All charges. All 11 defendants. Sentencing came 3 weeks later. Daniel Morgan, life without parole. James Morgan, life without parole. Robert, Michael, David, Thomas, William Morgan, 25 to 40 years each. Lucas, Frank, Henry, Samuel, 25 to 35 years each. When the judge read the sentences, Daniel Morgan showed no emotion, no tears, no shock, just a slight nod, as if he'd known from the moment he opened that door at the Garrett compound that this was exactly where he'd end up. The only thing he said when given a chance to speak was 7 words. "I protected my family, no regrets." Martha Morgan, sitting in the gallery, put her face in her hands and wept. Daniel Morgan served 37 years in the Federal Correctional Institution in Manchester, Kentucky. During that time, he worked in the prison library, teaching other inmates to read. He was quiet, respected even by violent criminals, never sought trouble. Guards said he was one of the most peaceful inmates they'd ever supervised, which always struck them as darkly ironic, given what he'd done to earn his sentence. Martha visited every Sunday for 19 years, driving the 80 miles from Harlan to Manchester without fail until the dementia took hold and she no longer remembered she had a husband in prison. She died in a nursing home in 2007, 76 years old, believing it was still September 24th, 1979, waiting for Daniel to come home from checking the coal. Daniel wasn't allowed to attend her funeral. On March 3rd, 2025, at 92 years old, Daniel Morgan died of congestive heart failure in the prison infirmary at 4:22 a.m. The chaplain on duty reported that Daniel's last coherent words were, "Tell my boys I'm sorry, not for what we did, for what it cost them." Whether he believed that in his final moment, or was still clinging to the justification that had sustained him for 37 years behind bars, nobody knows. He was buried in the prison cemetery with a simple marker, Daniel R. Morgan, 1927-20. 25. No mention of father, husband, coal miner, Vietnam veteran, just dates marking the beginning and end of a life that had transformed from honest work to unthinkable violence in one October night. James Morgan was released in 2012 after 25 years. He returned to Harlan County, got a job as a janitor at the high school, lives alone in a small apartment. He's 64 now, never married, never had children. His daughter, born 3 months before the massacre, barely knows him. They meet once a year on Christmas. The conversations are stilted, painful, full of things neither can say. In a rare 2018 interview with a documentary filmmaker, James said only, "I was 32 when it happened. I'm 64 now. I've had 32 years to think about that night. Still don't have answers, just nightmares." Robert Morgan died of a heart attack in prison in 2003. He was 44. The irony wasn't lost on anyone that he died the same age his father had been when planning the massacre. Michael Morgan was paroled in 2015. He's 62 now, lives in a trailer outside Cumberland, works part-time at a hardware store. Customers who know his history avoid him. Those who don't know think he's just another old man worn down by life in Appalachia. David and Thomas Morgan remain incarcerated at FCI Manchester. Both have been denied parole multiple times. Neither has granted interviews. Prison records show they rarely speak, even to each other. William Morgan, the youngest, was paroled in 2010 after 23 years. He was 19 when the massacre happened, 42 when released. He tried to build a life, got a job, rented a house, went to therapy twice a week, but he couldn't escape the faces. Couldn't stop seeing Kevin Garrett on his knees, praying. In November 2014, at 46 years old, William Morgan walked into the forest near Black Mountain and was never seen again. Search teams found his truck at a trailhead, found his wallet and keys inside, never found a body. The official report says presumed dead. Those who knew him say he finally found the only piece available to him. The 4 nephews have all been released at various points. 2 left Kentucky entirely, changed their names, disappeared into other lives. 2 remain in Harlan County, working quiet jobs, living quiet lives, carrying weight that never gets lighter. Susan Garrett, Tommy's widow, lived until 2019, 71 years old, outliving her husband by 40 years. She never remarried, never left Harlan County, raised her 2 daughters alone, working double shifts at a textile factory until it closed, then as a grocery store clerk. When reporters tracked her down on anniversaries, she'd say only, "They took everything, everything, and for what? Coal." She died of cancer, surrounded by daughters and grandchildren who carry the Garrett name and the weight of what happened to their family. Topdra. Garrett's daughters, 8 and 6 when their father was eliminated, are now 46 and 44. Both left Kentucky, changed their last names, rarely speak about their father. Both struggle with relationships, with trust, with the knowledge that violence can erupt from normalcy in seconds. The other Garrett widows and children scattered. Some stayed in Kentucky, most left. All carry scars that never fully heal. Post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, depression, substance abuse. The massacre's aftermath rippled through 2 generations, destroying futures that hadn't even begun yet. On that October night, the Morgan homestead was abandoned after Martha's death. Nobody wanted to buy it. Too much history, too many ghosts. The house collapsed in 2015 during a winter storm. Today, it's just a foundation overgrown with kudzu and briars. Local teenagers claim it's haunted. Parents tell children to stay away. The land itself seems to remember what happened, what was planned there, what started there. The Garrett compound was bulldozed in 1995. Today, it's an empty clearing where nothing grows quite right. The soil's too acidic, locals say. But some whisper it's because blood soaked too deep, because violence leaves marks on.